Good afternoon. We're going to talk about a subject that impacts you and everybody you know. Matter of fact, this subject is an inescapable subject. Everybody's dealing with it, and you may be dealing with it as we speak. This subject, as it says in the Bible somewhere, this subject kills tens of thousands of people. Marriages, parenting, businesses, dreams, no matter what place you're in, this subject right here, it's a monster if you do not deal with it correctly. The subject is disappointment. I got my friend Dan Hyun. Welcome, Dan.
Good to be here.
And we're going to talk about disappointment. And our hope is that as we walk through this conversation, you're going to benefit from this. You're going to learn from this, be challenged, encouraged, inspired, and maybe there's some room for you to grow. All right. So we're just going to walk through it like we always do. One of the things that you know about me, Dan, is that I don't like when we talk about things and we just assume that everybody knows what we're talking about. So when we talk about disappointment, when you hear that word, what comes to your mind?
I think one aspect of it's the universal nature of disappointment. Because I was thinking on this even as we were chopping it up earlier, like define it. I think you could do the encyclopedia definition, but I think a broader sense of understanding is almost if we look through the paradigm of sin, like we usually think about sin as moral things or things, and that's obviously true, but I think disappointment encapsulates all of that. It's a reminder that things as we experience it are not the way they were intended to be. That there is a universal sense that every single person, and it's going to take a different form, but every single person experiences this, and they wouldn't use the word sin, but things feel broken. It doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
It didn't go the way I thought it was supposed to go. So I guess that sense that, it's not the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, it's transcendent.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what religion you are, what political party, where you're born. It's like oxygen. It can live with the rich, the poor, the oppressed, the oppressor, those in wars, out of wars, right? It's an inescapable reality. Pretty much you live with from the moment of consciousness till death, right? I mean,
I think that's a lot of life is just learning how to deal with disappointment.
Yeah.
And everyone has a different way to do it. Some of it's healthy, some of it's not. But if you don't learn how to, you're setting yourself up for a big fall.
So, of course, I Googled because next to the Bible, Google's like the Bible, right? And the basic Google search says disappointment is a feeling of sadness or letdown that occurs when something doesn't meet one's expectations or hope. It's a common human experience that can range from mild annoyance to profound sadness and can be triggered by various situations, from small inconveniences to major life events. And then it talks about how disappointment is a state of feeling sad. And I wanted to ask you, what emotions are associated with disappointment?
That's a great question. And I don't think this is a cop-out, but I really think it depends on who you are.
Wow.
So I think what disappointment does, it unearths the deeper emotions that might even be kept under the surface. So some of us are angry people, but we learn to keep it. Some of us are sad. Some of us are expressive. Some of us get morose, whatever it might be. But I think when you encounter disappointment, it digs those different emotions out, and you really feel the brunt of whatever it might be.
Wow. It's almost like instead of taking the Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, or DISC, if you could learn, if disappointment became your friend, it might reveal something about you.
Well, yeah, and it doesn't feel like a friend, but I think it's incredible. But like for me, for instance, and I'll have different things that guide me through my leadership or working with people. One of the most insightful things about really learning who a person is see what they do when they encounter disappointment in their life. Because I think that shows, especially in a religious, spiritual context, that really shows what a person is, who they are, what they believe when they encounter disappointment and how they respond to it.
So would you agree with the statement, you don't know a person until you've experienced them in a relationship as they walk through disappointment?
I think so.
Or is that a little too hyperbolic Enneagram 8 for me?
No, I don't think we can know the deeper parts of who we are without disappointment. So even as I love the language you use there, it's a friend. It might be that friend you don't want around, but it might be your best friend.
Right.
Because it will really show you both who you are, but also the possible areas that you still need to grow.
Yeah.
So I think this is a universal human thing. I think disappointment has that effect, but obviously also in a spiritual context, I think disappointment is one of the most powerful means of helping us identify who we are, what are our stuff, but also as a means of growth. So, I mean, I've even thought in my own story, I've studied a good amount. I've done classes, groups, and they've all been beneficial. But honestly, I think one of the most formative, impactful things in my life has been disappointment.
This is Dr. Dan Kim, by the way. I have just a measly bachelor's and a master's. This is Dr. Kim. Author, too.
Well, and
speaker.
Well, I think that's, again, no one's going to choose disappointment. That's some of the nature of disappointment. It's almost like what you haven't chosen in life is coming on you. You have no...
You just gave me a word picture. Like, disappointment is not an elective.
Yeah.
You don't get to say, no, I don't want to take that. I'm not taking my languages. Like, no, it's like the course you take in every semester of life.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you don't get out of it. You never graduate. You're going to live with this for the rest of your life.
Well, and I think one of the powerful effects of disappointment, and again, from more of a Christian spiritual, I think there is nothing more illuminating about reminding us that there is a God and it's not us than disappointment. So even for Christians, even as we worship the Almighty God, and I think there's that human element that we still have the illusion we are little gods and that we can control certain things. And realistically, we do. We have the ability to make certain things happen, but disappointment is that universal thing that we all face and experience that reminds us, and sometimes it's a slap in the face, you're not God. And this is a fresh reminder of that.
What's your personal experience with disappointment?
I mean, again, what I was saying earlier, I think looking back, some of the most impactful, formative experiences of my life, I can see looking back now how they're centered around a theme of disappointment. And I think earlier in my life, realistically, a lot of the disappointment was from some of more of my mistakes or bad life choices and learning the consequence of having to deal with life not going the way I would want, but it's kind of my fault. But God using that. And honestly, one of the powerful things on a sidebar that I think about disappointment is if I'm in front of a group, for instance, and talking about, if we would do a survey here of what's brought you to want to know God, there's like a small little handful that are like, I just started studying the institutes or reading all the Luther I could and all the Spurgeon. And it just made sense to me that this is the path in life I should take. And I gave my life to the Lord right there as a 5-year-old. That happens and it's great. I would love that story for my own kids. But most people, I think it's even people whose lives looked really good. I did what I was supposed to, or I didn't do what I was supposed to, and I had to come face to face with the reality of my life is not in a good place right now, and there's got to be something more than this. So I think that's definitely what happened to me earlier on in life. Life was disappointing with the choices I made, and it was an invitation in that way to God.
Yeah.
I think where disappointment has taken on a different flavor for me, especially in maybe more of the second half of life or the later years, is when I've actually done what I'm supposed to do. I've kind of become accomplished. I'm fairly adept. I know what I'm supposed to do. I'm considered an expert in different things, and I'm committed to those things, but still doing all that, committing to it, being disciplined, and life still not going the way that I thought it should. that has been probably the most formative experience in my life recently,
Wow.
where we talk about things like the prosperity gospel, health and wealth, and we all laugh at it like that's so dumb. People believe like if you just give, God will give you a bigger house. But I think absolutely, because I see it in myself. I think even people with orthodox belief and doctrine, we have a version of the prosperity gospel
Hmm.
where we believe if we just do the right things, or if we go to the right places, or commit ourselves to the right practices, things will turn out the way they should. And when they don't, that throws us for a loop. That's
Yeah.
an existential crisis that I believe, though, ultimately invites us into a deeper knowledge of God.
Yeah. Do you think people disappointment is harder to deal with when it's your personal choice, your mistake, or when it's like your mom gets cancer or your best friend dies in a car accident? Which one do you think is harder for people to navigate through?
Yeah, well, I think it's dependent on the wiring of the person. For me personally, the things within my control when I have not done that, that's harder for me. So, for instance, if our family has gone through medical hardships, it's weird, but I don't really struggle as much with that because I'm like, I couldn't do anything about this.
Right.
Just gotta, you do have to process the disappointment from there, but it's a different kind of disappointment
Right.
more than kind of the guilt of, man, I really screwed this up.
Yeah. Yeah. Where does it come from? Where does disappointment come from? What's its origin? What soil in the soul does it grow in?
Again, not to over spiritualize it, but I do think there is an aspect of it that common human propensity to want to be God. And I think because if we have a clear understanding that we're not God and we have a right understanding of who we are, there's not much that disappoints you
Right.
because it's all a gift.
Right.
But when you start to think, I have agency, I can control my life, I think control is a big factor there. When things go out of control, there's nothing that's more painful than the pain of disappointment to remind you there are things that you either cannot do, things that you've messed up, things that you've done perfectly right, but it's not going the way. I think control is a big factor there.
I also think that there's something in every single person, no matter what their background, beliefs are, religious, religious, that expects life to be a certain way.
Mhm.
I don't think you're taught that. I think you're born with it. I think it's cultivated. I think it's nature, not nurture. You come out of the womb, and as you become conscious, because you could see it in like little babies. Like, I expect to eat right now. I expect this kind of food. This my phone, my tablet battery went dead. Now they're a tantrum. You see what I mean? It's like life's supposed to be a certain way.
Yep.
And it's like, wait a minute, you're 18 months old. How are you pitching a fit that your tablet battery went dead? You don't even know what a tablet is other than you hold it. You don't understand how it works. But what they do get is life's supposed to be a certain way. And when life isn't that way, I got a problem with that. You see that?
Absolutely. And I think, I always like practical applications, examples. I think it helps to articulate and give us, I think a lot of relational conflict can stem down to disappointment. Why do we have conflict with spouses, coworkers, family members, people in our church? It's they're doing something or not doing something or saying something that's leading to our belief that they're leading to my disappointment.
Right.
It's there, and relational conflict comes out of it. But I think it gives us a deeper understanding of some of the root things within ourselves. Why are we so upset about this? We have this sense it should not be like this.
Right.
It should be better.
Yes. There's an innate sense in every single person that things should be better than they are. Things should work out the way they're supposed to work out. 2 + 2 = 4. If I put in this much work, I should get the promotion. I should get the job. I should have the child. My kids should not have a disability. My husband shouldn't leave me. No divorce. God should answer my prayers. That's innate. Then we have complexes we take on, like the God complex, right? And then we have nurture and culture that are influencing us, selling us, molding us, kind of forming in us these things about expectations that are way up here. It's crazy because I was talking to someone about the recent like Middle East stuff. And they asked me, like, what do you think? And I didn't want to say first thing that came to my mind, but then I just said it, which was, yeah, it's par for the course. They're like, no, this is different because it's nuclear. I was like, no, it's not. Before there are nuclear weapons, there were bombs. Humans dropped bombs. United States dropped a nuclear weapon. Thank God no other nuclear weapon has ever been dropped. But given the trajectory of humanity, given the nature of human beings, if you just slow your roll and stop being so delusional, is it really crazy to think that we won't see a nuclear? You see what I'm saying? Like, we have this expectation. We're not using nuclear weapons. Why do we have that expectation? I don't want it to happen. I hope it never happens. But it's like, but we live in the real world where people probably died today because they didn't have anything to eat. Where there's a woman who's longing to get pregnant and it's not happening. You understand what I'm saying? Like, that's the real world where there's a gap between what we think should be and what is, and that gap is disappointment. And so it's kind of like, to me, it's almost like a failure to embrace it and say, it's not about going over it, under it, through it. It's about just navigating our life with it.
And I think that's so powerful, because I think, like, even what you were saying earlier, like, which is harder to process, like disappointment that comes from your actions or just happens to you. I think there's an aspect of living where you can almost become jaded or nihilistic, like it doesn't matter what I do. But I think it's almost, I don't want to say more painful, but difficult the more you do have power in this world or status or abilities. Because it's like building the Tower of Babel. You can keep building it taller and taller and taller, but it feels you hit a point where disappointment, it's common to every single person. And again, I've been thinking about disappointment even more in that way, as a better understanding of what does it mean when we say a sinful, fallen world. Obviously, people do bad things. That's part of it. But I think it's a sense of you just wake up some days and maybe we call it depression or we call it just sadness, but it's like, is this what life is supposed to be?
Right.
It feels off. Like something
Right.
feels like there's a shadow over this. And I think some people feel it more acutely. Others, they feel it, but they can medicate themselves out of it. And by medicate, I don't just mean narcotics, but they
Right.
can find things to try to mask it. But in the end, it's that thing when you're trying to fall asleep at night, and no matter how good life is, you're like, man, this is hard.
So what would you say to somebody who said disappointment isn't real?
What do you mean by that?
So, like, whenever you like say an idea, sometimes people say that's not real. Freedom's not real, or time's not real. It's the clock, it's not real. What would you say to somebody who said, yeah, disappointment's not real? Like, explain, like, would you say, like, well, look at human history. You're going to tell billions and billions and billions of people through thousands of years that that's not what they experienced? Or
I don't know if I would say this to them because I wouldn't want to get in an argument, but it reminds me in a slightly different way of someone I encountered once who told me feelings are not real. Like, kind of the idea of feelings are whatever you want to make of it, but that's not real hard fact. I'm like, it's absolutely real, but what it was saying to me is this person's not in touch with their feelings, their
Mm,
emotions. They're trying to almost have a shelter from that. I think in the same way with disappointment, it's inevitable. Every single person experiences disappointment, but I guess you can put on a shiny, happy face and say, it's whatever you want to make of it. You know, you don't have to be disappointed,
right.
but I think that's betraying the sense that, but there's something broken, which I don't think anyone could disagree with, no matter, and it's not even a religious thing, but something is broken.
But I think some people deny that. And this is why this is what I think. I think they would deny disappointment's existence because they have a way to perceive and process it where it's minimalized in their life,
Hmm.
whether it's good or bad of what they're doing. So therefore, they're like, well, it doesn't exist. It's what you make of it. It's blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, I don't think so. I just think you found a way to successfully navigate your way through it where it's not felt. You know, it's like somebody lives in Alaska, right? There's a 99% chance that their body has acclimated to cold weather, right? You bring them here this week in Maryland, it's been 100 degrees. They're going to be like, oh my gosh, it's crazy. Then you take someone here in Maryland and you take them to Alaska, and there's a really good chance they're shivering, right? So the person in Alaska is like, it's not even cold. It's just like 2 degrees. This isn't even really cold. Wait till, you see what I'm saying? And it's like,
Yeah.
well, it's not that that's not real. It's that the way you perceive it and process it is different than another person, but that doesn't mean it's not real.
That's really good. And I think that shows I don't know if it could, I think there's an aspect of you have to almost be able to do that just to survive and to like,
Yes.
you can't get crippled by every feeling of disappointment.
Yes.
Like there has to be a sense of, well, yeah, it's disappointing, but how's that going to help to dwell in that?
Yeah.
Again, I think there's a part of that that's really helpful, probably a sign of some grit and maturity. I do think though it could, there does need to be some care to see, are you just not in touch with some of those things that are real?
How would you feel about this statement? You cannot control disappointment, but you always have the freedom to respond to it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think that just nails it right there. Well, the reality is disappointment is par for the course for every single person. The degree of it's going to be different. Part of it is the invitation to be reminded we are not God ultimately. And that I think that has to be the first step to say, there are some things out of my control, but identifying what is in my control, it's how I respond to those disappointments.
And that would explain why you and I could go through the same disappointment and I could be curled up in the bed, depressed for like 6 days. And you're out bowling, hanging out with people, doing all this stuff, praising God. And then they look at me and go, oh my gosh, you must have went through something so terrible. And they're like, oh, and you're like, hey, yeah, I went through some disappointment. They're like, it doesn't look like it. When in actuality, we went through the same thing. We just perceived and processed it different, right? So then we do have choice. We play a role in how disappointment functions in our life. We're not that victimized. It's going to be there, but we still have a choice as to like, well, is it going to be my friend or my enemy? Am I going to embrace it or am I going to reject it? Am I going to medicate it or am I going to use it? Am I going to learn from it? I'm going to sit at its feet. Is it going to become my asset or is it always in every circumstances a liability? We get to choose that. We don't get to choose the disappointment that comes in our life, but we get to choose it. We can say, okay, I have this box of disappointment. I'm going to put it on this shelf in my life. I'm going to rank it. I don't have to say, well, this disappointment goes to the top of the list. This is the most important thing. Ignore my family, ignore my kids, ignore God, ignore everything. This becomes God. I get to choose that.
And I think, so I always have to qualify. I'm not anti-study or I actually believe there's real value in a good study of just overall, but especially as a Christian, you need to do that. Um, but I think what I would say is disappointment is one of those great things like you're describing, where ultimately that's the real kind of when the pedal hits, that's where you see the effect of all that you know about God and what you've studied outside of the laboratory on the playing field in the real life. Disappointment is going to be the most accurate indicator of how do you actually apply those things that you say you believe about God.
Or we could say it this way. You don't have to tell me what you know about God and what you think about God. I'm just going to wait and watch you go through a season of disappointment. And that will tell me everything I need to know of what you know and think about God.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
That's it. It's raw, but it's real. If someone wants to know what Michael Crawford really believes about God, don't catch me at the mountaintop. Catch me in the valley.
Yep.
Catch me when nothing works out. Catch me when I did it. I'm the one who made the poor, wicked, evil choice. I did it. And now I'm getting this disappointment. Catch me then, and then watch what I do, not what I say. And then you'll go, oh, now I know.
Yeah.
Does he still show up? Does he still do this? Will he still give? Will he still trust? Will he still take? You see what I'm saying? Because then you go, oh, well, this person's trust and belief, whether it's about God or whatever, it's transcending the disappointment. It's finding a way through it.
And I think, and when we think about the story of Job, we always, probably the word we go to is suffering. And I think in some sense, suffering and disappointment, there's a lot of interaction there. But the nature of it is, in a way, Job experienced the epitome of what it meant for life to be disappointing, and exactly what you were saying. Well, of course he worships you. He's got everything great, everything, but watch what happens when he doesn't.
Right.
And I think that's a real powerful, poignant example that we all walk through as well. Our disappointment and how we respond to it, I think, can be one of the most powerful ways that we testify to who God really is.
Yeah.
To a skeptical world that says, well, of course, y'all, yeah. But when you see people responding in a way through the hardest things that are disappointing in life, but choosing to believe in this God and trusting that he's actually at work, I think that's a powerful testimony to who he is.
So you've been dealing with people for 3 decades, 30 plus years. You've been a pastor, you've been a denominational leader, you've thrown conferences about ethnicity and racial reconciliation. You spoke in front of people who are not religious, people who are religious, all different types of tribes. You've done a lot, right? You've written books. You've seen people deal with disappointment. What are like 2 or 3 or 4 ways that you would say, don't do it this way?
Don't do it this way.
Yeah.
Well, I think one would be kind of what we were, and again, I think there's a difference between the grit and the perseverance of not becoming shackled by your disappointment, because I do think there's a redemptive power in those people who just seem naturally joyful, I think there's something good about that. I don't think they're pretending, but I do think there are some who might look like that who are not really engaging with some of the harder parts of life. And some of that I don't judge because it's just too hard.
Yeah.
Or it's since what's that going to do to help me? What I've experienced with people is that eventually surfaces one day. Because I think the core of a lot of disappointment is ultimately your trust in God. And if you don't deal with that, I think that burrows into your soul and it produces fruit that's not as healthy. That does become things like resentment, bitterness, anger. And sometimes those don't happen right away. But that's one thing I would caution against, kind of just ignoring it. And I mean, you know me, I'm big about what are your feelings tell you. I think disappointment brings up a lot of those feelings, emotions. Pay attention to some of what's going on, but suppressing it or pushing it to the side, even in the name of expediency, I don't know if that's always helpful.
Yeah, we started off the conversation about what emotions are associated with it. I definitely think sadness is one. Um, and maybe frustration, anger, fear, depression, but they're all rooted in loss. Disappointment is really like, if you were to say disappointment's a tree, what's the soil? It's loss. It's limitations and loss. That's the soil upon which the trees of disappointment grow. And so it's always connected to that because the emotions reveal that, because it's sadness, it's depression, which is things aren't working out, or I just don't, like, life's terrible, it sucks, loss of hope, frustration and anger because why isn't it working? This isn't right. It's not just after what I've done. And so people, to me, embrace it, tell the truth, live the truth, no matter the consequences when it comes to disappointment. Because here's what happens. If you experience disappointment, you can do two things with it. You can exaggerate it and it can become your identity. It can determine whether you're safe or not, and it can determine how you're doing. That's exaggerate. That's how you know it's exaggerated. You can diminish it, and now you're basically using coping mechanisms. Even spiritual bypass, quoting verses, going to church, extra prayer meetings, just to bury it. I'm a big fan of, you need to take disappointment, give it a name, sit it at your kitchen table, take it to Chipotle with you, and you need to become its friend because it ain't going nowhere. It's actually not your enemy. Disappointment is your friend. It reminds you you're not God. It reminds you you're human. It reminds you you're dealing with everything what everybody else is dealing with. It reminds you, if you're religious, this is not your home. This is, can we say this? This is a failed experiment.
Yeah.
Scripture would say ruined by us, right? But it reminds you, like, your expectations are too high.
Mm-hmm.
You actually think you're going to go through this life and everything's just going to work out. Your kids are all going to be healthy. You're going to be healthy. No one's going to get cancer. No one gets hit by a car. No one that you know or yourself was never going to sin their way and disqualify. Like, that's not the real world. In the real world, this is what you experience. And so what it does is it brings you back down. And I'll end with this. Listen, disappointment is kind of like it's like an irrevocable characteristic that puts a stamp on your humanity.
Mm-hmm.
I know you're human because you deal with disappointment.
Well, that's, I think what you're nailing something really profound because, again, in some sense, you're saying, what should we not do? I think we do it for ourselves. But I think whether unwittingly or whether intentionally we do that to others, maybe more in the church than outside the church.
1,000%.
And it's with good intent. Like,
Yes.
we should not be people who have disappointment. Yeah, life is hard, but we've been given a new hope. We don't belong to this. And I think we set people up, whether it's explicit or not, that this is something that I should not be experiencing right now.
Yes.
What's wrong with my faith?
Yes.
Why aren't I like that person who they just seem so cheery and happy about it? And just from my experience, so if I'm speaking to groups, I mean, if I'm giving people challenges and talking about who they can be, and I think there's some good fruit from that. But what I've really seen fruit from is when I give voice to the disappointment of life.
Yes.
Even from my own story and how God has used disappointment to make me who I am. I feel like it almost feels like again, not to over spiritualize the feel, but it almost feels like a cover comes out of a room.
Because it does.
Because for some people, and it astounds me because it's just, I live with it every day, but for some people, they've never heard that before.
Yeah, because we can all identify. Finally, we're not worshiping a guy on a stage. He's not extraordinarily gifted. Finally, he's speaking my language. I deal with this every day. My wife, my kids, everybody I know. This is common language. It's like when you go to a foreign country and you can't speak the language and you get a translator. It's like, oh, now I hear you. Now I see you. Now I get you. I'm lifted. Talk to me now
Yep.
because you're speaking my real language. You know, this is something else. Like I I don't everyone has to process it at their own speed, but I don't think we should rush people through disappointment.
No.
And I think sometimes if we're trying to sell our faith, it doesn't market well if you have a bunch of disappointed people in a church that aren't getting over it and living victorious lives. Like, who's going to want to be a part of the church if we're all running around here sad? And it's like, maybe the people on the outside aren't coming in because they don't see us as sad. And they're like, well, I don't fit there. I'm not happy. And we say, that's because you don't have the Lord. It's like, are you serious?
And
It's crazy. It's such spiritual bypass.
It's true, and it's and maybe I'll never have a career as a motivational speaker because I say things like this. But I've said in certain settings, there are some things that you're walking in disappointment that you will not see the full redemption of it until you're on the other side of glory.
Well. Which is disappointing.
Yeah.
Can we just say it? It's disappointing. Yeah. It's disappointing. Let's just say it. It's disappointing.
You can make the most of it. You can even be happy, but there are some things that you will not see the full sense of this is how it was supposed to be until you're on the full completion of salvation.
And all you have to do is, like, for example, read through the Old Testament. When Abraham died, think about how he died. Like, God made all these promises, and even the New Testament says he didn't even realize them all. Mm-hmm. Imagine that. You're 75 years old. God's like, get up, let's go to a land I'm not going to show you. It's going to be all these promises. And it's like, do I ever get to see all this? Moses strikes the rock. God's like, you're not going to the promised land. What? I didn't even want to do this in the first place. These knuckleheads got me all, as they say, crashed out, you know? And now I do this and I don't get to see it, but that's part of the disappointment, isn't it? Part of the disappointment is there's a lot of things in life that we want to see realized. We want to experience them, and that's normal. It's good. It's innate. But the reality is, it ain't gonna happen. And that's part of the disappointment. Let me ask you this. What can disappointment teach us?
I do think, again, in some sense, I think the wonderful thing about some of the universal nature of these truths is you don't have to be a Christian to understand some aspects of it. So, I mean, we have all the stories of like MJ. Yep. He had to experience being cut from his team, and it built something in him so that he could become like J.K. Rowling. How many rejections in her work? I mean, people make memes to the end based on all of these kind of inspirational stories. And so I think there's a universal sense of realizing we need to go through disappointment to get to where we're supposed to be. But I think for the Christian, a unique part of it is disappointment is not just something to get over to get you to where you're supposed to be. It's going to be a part of who you are in creating a dependence upon God.
Don't say that. I want to hear that. We'll cut that out. Nope. I don't like that. I don't like that. I don't like that.
But without disappointment in my life, I am totally content with me being God and making my best life. But disappointment, whether I would have chosen the path or not, it's occasion after occasion after occasion in my life where I see things did not go the way I would have if I was God. And only you can't see it in the moment. There's just no way to know in the moment, no matter how many wise Christians tell you God's closing a window so he can open the door or whatever it might be.
Wow.
You just can't know it in the moment, but upon looking back, you see, okay, when we talk about God's providence, that's what it means. Oh, okay. It's not that he's a puppet master, but he is using the deepest disappointments in my life, and we will still have memories of some of those things, but we also see that he can be trusted in his work.
You meant it for evil. He meant it for good. I think disappointment is actually one of our best friends. I say one because I think we have a lot of best friends that we don't think are our best friends. We consider them enemies, like sadness. Disappointment is one of our best friends. And because it reminds us that we're irrevocably human.
Yeah.
It reminds us of the fragile nature of this life. It reminds us that, like, we're going to die. It reminds us that, oh my gosh, I'm so disappointed because this person thinks this and this and they treated me this. You know they're going to die. And when they die, their stuff goes with them. Like, it reminds us of so many good things. And I think for me as a believer, it reminds me that I'm not God, but it also reminds me of how good God is.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm just going to say it. Look, I have tasted, taste and see that the Lord is good. The times in my life where I've tasted God's goodness the most have been the times in my life when I've been most disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even to the point of going, why am I even here?
Yeah.
What is the point? To the point where it's like, I've messed my whole life up. I'm never going to be anything. I've just ruined it all by the decisions I made, the actions I took, the attitudes I have. I'm done. I'm just alone. I'm broke. I have nothing. What's the point? Utter bleakness, disappointment. I remember one time I called you and I was like, bro, I'm so lonely and it's so quiet. The silence is deafening. It's like the silence is deafening. Yeah. I was so disappointed. How did I end up here? And God was so rich in those times. It's just incredible.
Well, and I think it's that reminder. We will always choose what we think is best for ourselves, but it's, again, a reminder we're not God and our perspective is limited. And yes, we're not God, but that's good news because there is a God and he's more for us than we are for us. And because of that love, he can see things that we just can't see in our finite nature. And he's even allowing disappointment to be part of our experience of deeper joy and contentment in this life.
Well, let me ask you this. Somebody's listening to this, they say, okay, I got it. You've beaten it over. What skill sets do I need to navigate my way through disappointment?
I think one is like you were saying, you have to voice it. You have to actually articulate it. I think so much of our challenge, and again, not to beat on the church, but we just keep a lot of things hidden, especially things that make small group awkward.
Right.
Everyone wants to talk about the victories, but we don't like groups that we like it one week, but we don't want week after week when someone's talking about the same disappointment over and over. And like you were saying, oh man, we prayed about this last week. I thought it'd be gone by this week. The same thing week after week. Yeah. A couple that can't conceive. You're just not praying it away. It's there week after week after week. And the honest reality is where we get kind of weary from it. But the sad, I think, thing is people then feel like they have to keep it to themselves. But I think it's like fungus kept in the darkness. It just breeds on itself. But light is the best disinfectant. First, we need to voice it. We need to give a name to what that disappointment is and put it out there. Take away some of its power in our life. Yeah. So it can be a good friend, but it can also be a tremendous enemy, telling us lies about who God is. Yeah. Some of the ways we combat that is by bringing it out. But I think one of the best ways we also bring it out are trusted companions. And I don't think it's going to be everyone, but some people who don't just do spiritual bypasses. I love that terminology. They don't just give
it like everything else.
They don't just give you pat answers, but they sit with you into disappointment.
Yeah.
They don't feed into your morbid kind of, oh yeah, it's all, why do we even bother? But they actually give you hope, but they also sit with you and they don't give a quick, let's just fix this. And I think those are a couple of basic things that we need even to start off to redeem some of the greater disappointments. I think the greatest tragedy in religious spaces is there are so many people being crippled under their disappointments, feeling they're being punished, not realizing that God is wanting to invite them into a greater knowledge of him. That's one of the best things we can do for one another, draw one another out, say. And we do that by even voicing our own disappointments.
Yeah. We're uncomfortable with disappointment, even though it's a transcendent, inescapable reality. But our discomfort in it causes us to repel it, then to fake the funk in it and pretend like we're not it's not doing anything of us, and then we all just succumb. And
Yeah.
I think that really is a problem. I think if you want to deal with disappointment well through skill sets, you need to be self-aware. You need to know how you're prone to perceive and process it. Because if you don't even know that, your perceptions and processes are going to take you places. And when you don't know where you're going, you're going to end up somewhere, probably somewhere you don't want to be. Somebody wrote that in a book sometime. I don't know who that is. But the other thing is that you have to be emotionally intelligent and regulated, because disappointment is primarily an emotion rooted in a perception, a thought. But the emotion is got all these other cousins and friends, or they say cousins in them. And if you're not intelligent and you can't, that's sadness. And you can't speak to your sadness. Why are you so sad? Well, because I had hoped. Well, what did you hope? Why did you hope that? Well, and then if you can't speak to that sadness and regulate that sadness, and if this is too secular, then, David said, "Why art thou cast down, O my soul?" Psalm 103,
Yeah.
"Bless the Lord, O my soul." Self-talk is biblical. It's not Oprah. Like it's Christian, every bit of Christian, right? So I think a skill set is being able to be self-aware, but also to be able to be emotionally intelligent, mentally intelligent, to have some sort of awareness. And as this is my soapbox, but it's like you get skills through learning how to use tools. It's like, so if you're like, well, how do I become more self-aware? You need a tool. I don't care what tool it is. You need a self-awareness tool, right? I love the Enneagram. If you want emotional awareness, you need an emotional awareness tool, right? I mean, I love my emotional MRI, but find whatever tool you can get. But those skill sets will help you navigate. I didn't say get out of disappointment. That ain't. But navigate through them so you don't lose your mind. Let me ask you this. Were you going to say something?
Well, I was going to say, I think with all that, there has to be a deep level of security to be able to, because I do think there is a barrier sometimes of feeling. I mean, I don't want to tell people I have disappointments because it feels weak. And I think there's a cultural messaging. If you have disappointments, or if people know your disappointments, not just that you're morally inept, but that you're a weak person.
All right, let's do a role play. Okay, you asked me how I'm doing, and I'm going to play this out.
So how are you doing, Mike?
I'm very disappointed. Instant, like, fart in the room, right?
Mhm.
Just it's like, oop, how do I respond? Well, the right response, I'm disappointed, Mike. Really, what are you disappointed about?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this, and this, and this. Really? Well, how's that been? What's so hard about that?
Yeah.
Every valuable thing we want in life is on the other side of a discomfort. Everything. Yeah. So the idea that I'm going to get to some higher plane, some greater depth knowledge of God, some greater relationship with my wife or with my children or in my vocation, and I'm going to avoid discomfort is not going to happen. And disappointment is uncomfortable.
Yep.
Let me ask you this as we wrap this up. When you think about the Bible, you think about God, and you think about the subject of disappointment, is there anything that pops in your head, a narrative, a story, an instance, a teaching, a word?
Yeah, one of my favorite stories is actually the story of Judah in the Bible. And I encourage people to go read it on their own in Genesis. But just, and I think it's a great example of disappointment that comes from obviously his own toxic actions, but being reminded how even in that, ultimately, his story gets redeemed for God's purposes, where it was totally tragic and disappointing. And again, it's a weird text to preach to people, but I think it resonates with people because most of us, even if on the surface we look like we all got it together, there are levels of disappointments. Some of us have even compensated for it and no one would ever know about it, but it's there. And just voicing out loud, God is present even in those things.
Why is it weird, though?
there is still a certain level of pride that God saves us, but we should figure it out on our own. And
So that's why it's weird.
I think, even the whole idea of working out your salvation, and I
Yeah.
know people get all twisted up theologically. What does that
Yeah.
mean? I think part of that working out our salvation is learning how to process things like disappointment,
Yes.
like taking that saving knowledge of God's grace, but here's how it really means on the ground
Yeah.
in real life things outside of the Sunday school room. The best classroom is going to be things like disappointment. How does God show up there? How are you going to learn a presence of God that you would not be able to learn in the best mountaintop setting?
Yeah. I look at it like this. Through the lens of redemptive history, I look at it like disappointment is not in Genesis 1 and 2. It's introduced to every human being in Genesis 3, what we call the fall.
Mhm.
Then after the fall comes redemption. And what God does over thousands of years is teach people, walk with people, save people, encourage people, convict people, guide people, lead people, provide people, resource people, be merciful, patient, good, loving, all these things while they're dealing with disappointment, culminating in the ultimate disappointment, which is the breakdown of our relationship with God and others. And we see the prescription in the gospel.
Yeah.
Right? And the promise of the gospel is that in this age a little bit, which we mess up, but in the next age, in the age to come, disappointment's gone.
Yep.
Now people say, oh my gosh, you guys are religious people, you blah, 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 blah. Whatever. Everybody has a gospel. Maybe your gospel is if Trump only had a Congress. Maybe your gospel is if Biden would have been reelected. I don't know what your good news is on how you fix what's broken to eliminate disappointment. But there's very few people on this planet who don't have a remedy for what's wrong, aka disappointment. And my thing is when I look at scripture, I'm like, wait a minute. That means the majority of the Bible deals with disappointment.
And, I think traditionally in Christian settings, we think about an invitation to gospel, telling people how bad they are, and this is why you need Jesus, which is absolutely true. But we're also in an age where people who don't follow Jesus looks at a Christian and say, I'm actually a better person than them.
Exactly.
I'm actually more morally than... But I found a much more compelling invitation to the ways of Jesus is through lens of things like disappointment.
Yeah.
Like disappointment, again, could be one of your best friends and if I look at a church room, I'll say most of you are in this room. Most of you follow Jesus because you came face to face with some disappointment in life that says there's got to be something else.
Yes.
That is an incredibly kind gift from God. But in the moment, it feels like it's crushing you.
So let's close with this. Someone's listening to this. They made it all the way through our babble. And they're like, I am facing disappointment right now. What do you say to them?
I would say pause in that. Identify what you're feeling. If you can find someone who seems to know something about God, express some things with them, but have some quiet moments where you speak to the God of this universe who's big enough to handle your disappointments and say, Lord, if you're real, I'd like to meet you through even these things.
Yeah. And don't quit. Take the next step, even if it's ugly, messy, full of tears, doubt, frustration, anger, sloppy, doubting, angry. Don't quit. Take the next step. Peace.